you've obviously touched upon this, but the main conclusion, if possible, of your new book. What conclusions did you come in the new book, the places that inspired Middle Earth?
Well, you know, very, very simply, of course, England was very important, but then so it turns out were other parts of Britain. There was this dialogue going on in Tolkien's head between the main cultural heritages of the British Isles, you know, Celtic and Anglo-Saxon, and this is reflected in complex ways within his mythology, like between the hobbits in particular in the Shire and the elves who live off to the west by the sea, you know. But it's not something that you should take as being, you know, the end all of this is how you must interpret Tolkien. It's more interesting to look at the evolution of this, and that's something I spent a chapter mapping out, just that one kind of dialogue between Celtic and Anglo-Saxon. I thought that the topic of places that inspired Tolkien was a bit trivial. It was actually suggested to me by a friend who introduced me to her publisher, who's ended up publishing the book, Francis Lincoln. When I got into it, I realized it wasn't trivial, and it was really fascinating. You know, there's a deep importance of place. There are wider influences than even Tolkien acknowledged. So, you know, he tended to valorize northernness, of course, you know, his own field, Old Norse, Anglo-Saxon influences. But he had also had a very developed classical education. So there's all kinds of influences from Greek and Roman literature and myth. And then further afield, I found the influence of the culture of Mesopotamia, right? I also think, this is something that didn't go into the book, I think some of Tolkien's sound aesthetic, particularly in the language of the Grey Elves, Sindarin, which he consciously modelled on Welsh. A lot of those place names in particular actually look like they could come out of what Tolkien would have called the Old Testament. But the fundamental thing for me is just the sheer interest in tracing creative processes. They're a story in themselves. So with Tolkien, we have an author who's in a fairly unique position, where his son Christopher, who died last year, did an incredible amount of work in publishing things that his father had left unfinished. So first of all, he published the Silmarillion and created, by just almost entirely just by editing things his father had written together, a coherent book of legends called the Silmarillion. And then he went on to show us how that had developed, and he did so in a series of 12 books called The History of Middle-earth. And it's an amazing treasure trove for anyone who's interested, not just in Middle-earth, but in how a writer's imagination works and develops.